Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today and thank you all very much for joining. My name is Liam Doyle. I'm a product specialist here at StaffConnect, and part of my role is to host these webinars to discuss with people like yourselves the importance of employee engagement and how mobile technology can transform engagement and internal comms. So our webinar today is slightly different as we are joined by Emma Bridger of People Lab, who will be taking us through her report, Spotlight on the Employee Engagement Profession. So this thorough and insightful report helped us to understand how organisations are approaching this ever-growing issue. So Emma Bridger is one of the UK's leading employee engagement and communication experts and has recently finished writing the second edition of her book, Employee Engagement, published by Coke & Page, which will be out in August this year. She has over 20 years experience gained in a variety of roles in diverse organisations, from utilities and financial services through to the public sector. Indeed, Emma came to this field in an unconventional route, previously lecturing on graduate and postgraduate courses in psychology, her specialist area being behaviour change. So combining this understanding of psychology with practical business experience and an MBA, Emma has demonstrated how organisations can achieve their goals and create a competitive advantage by focusing on engagement with their people, customers and stakeholders. Emma's clients view her as a trusted advisor, adding value at a strategic level whilst being able to deliver on an operational level too. Indeed, Emma has designed and developed the CIPD's range of public employee engagement courses, as well as contributing to and being published within the UK Government Review Engage for Success. Emma now advises the Government Task Force on Engagement as part of the Guru Group. So Emma is also a regular conference speaker, and case studies detailing her work have been published in industry journals. She is also a qualified practicing coach and a member of the Institute of Public Relations. So a bit of background about our speaker today, and what I'll do now is I shall hand over to Emma. Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Liam. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be asked by StaffConnect to join the webinar today, so thank you very much. I've known the StaffConnect guys for a number of years now, and we've kind of talked about sort of doing various bits and pieces together for quite a while, so it's nice to finally get something off the ground. So thank you, Liam. So today I'm just going to run through a few slides to share with you some of the findings from research that we conducted last year and the year before, called Spotlight on Employee Engagement. Obviously, you can ask questions, we can submit questions as we're going through, and there'll be a chance to answer those questions at the end. Okay, so, just trying to, always a technical issue, that's it, here we go. Okay, so, so understanding the engagement gap. So the reason that we wanted to run this research was, it really came about through, I guess, an observation that more and more people, more and more companies are focusing on employee engagement. It was getting higher and higher up the management agenda within HR, and yet things didn't seem to be improving. So just a few kind of stats here to sort of bring that home, really. So, you know, HR elite are spending time on it. The Deloitte, this is the 2015 human capital trends, but equally, you know, same sort of findings from more recent reports all say engagement's important. Companies are really serious about engagement, and yet what we see from pretty much any number of reports you want to look at, whether it's CIPD reports or reports from Towers or Hayes, or any number of people will tell you that we're not very good at it. We haven't used more recent CIPD figures in here because they actually measure it slightly differently now, but you kind of get the picture. Basically, lots of focus on engagement and yet little or no improvement. And I've actually had been involved in quite a number of kind of debates online recently, with lots of people getting, you know what people are like on LinkedIn, they get quite like sort of road rage, where people think they can say stuff to you because they're in behind the wheel of a car. I find the same on social media. People are getting actually quite rude, aggressive, if that's the right word, but sort of saying this is a complete load of nonsense. It's completely emperor's new clothes. Engagement hasn't shown to impact anything. So why are you still focusing on it? And I kind of get where people are coming from by saying that, because we aren't seeing any improvements. But for me, the reason that we're not seeing the improvements we want to see is because people aren't really doing it right, doing it properly, and that we'll go into this in the report. So we all know, I'm sure you guys know on the call, that if you kind of tackle this in the right way and focus on it in the right way, then you absolutely do get those improvements that you want from engaged workforce. So this is where the kind of research started, by saying, well, let's try and understand what this gap is and why this gap occurs. So we ran the research in 2016 and again in 2017, and we're going to be running it again this year. I'm just going to take some of the kind of top level findings from the report. I'm just not sure if my I'm not quite sure if I'm driving this presentation or if Liam is. I'm sort of pressing buttons and it's not really doing much. Okay, so who did we speak to? So this time we spoke to about 76 organisations. The majority are headquartered in the UK. Big range of employees. 31% had over 5,000 employees, and a range of sectors represented. So we spoke to a good number of organisations, and year on year we hope to kind of see that figure go up, so we can kind of speak to a wider pool of people. And when we started to look at the results, the picture began to become clear in terms of why there's this huge amount of discussion, focus, conversation about engagement, and yet not a lot of improvements. So in the last year that we ran this, so 2017, we found that only 14% of companies have a company-wide definition of engagement. That was down from 25% the year before. So straight away, you've got to ask the question, if people are focusing on engagement, but they haven't really figured out what they mean by engagement or how they define engagement, it's no wonder that we're not quite sure if we're making improvements or not. Surely that's the starting place to say, what is it we mean by engagement? And we found that only 42% had a strategy, so less than half. And again, that was down 3 percentage points from the year before. Again, it's understandable that if we don't really know what we mean by engagement and we haven't got a strategy, we're probably not going to have that much success in improving things. 56% of companies said that they needed to demonstrate return on investment. So that's improved quite a bit from last year. So it's up kind of 15 percentage points, which is pretty significant, but still only just over half. So it's quite interesting that kind of companies saying we haven't got definition, haven't really got a strategy, but we're being tasked to demonstrate return on investment. So it's all a bit of a mess, really. And only 28% said that they thought employee engagement was well measured in their organisation, compared to 44% last year. So again, quite a big difference there. Interestingly, what we found this year was that 39% of people replying to the survey said that they now have engagement in their job title. So again, that was up from 22% the previous year. So again, pretty significant uplift there. So it seems that companies are saying, well, we kind of want to take it seriously. We'll create jobs with it in the title, and yet the stuff that's really going to move the dial in engagement isn't really being done yet. I.e., how do we define it? How do we have a strategy? What's our strategy look like? And how do we measure it? Okay, just a little bit more on defining engagement. So of those 14% that do have a definition, very few said that it was well understood in the organisation. So some stats there just to kind of bring that to life a little bit. But most of them sort of saying, even though we have got a definition, it's not really very well understood. So some real challenges for practitioners around this issue of how do we define it and how do we ensure people understand what we mean by it. We asked about the enablers of engagement. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the enablers, they came out of the Engage for Success work to government. So have a look at them online if you're interested. But we asked about areas around kind of line management, employee voice, strategic narrative. We add in involvement because we feel it's an enabler that wasn't included in the original report to government that should have been, and integrity. And you can see again, we've included the stats from the previous year that they're pretty well adopted. People are kind of using the enablers as a framework. So people are focusing on line management when it comes to engagement. and employee voice. Strategic narrative's gone up a bit. Haven't got a comparable figure for involvement because we only included it this year, or the last recent report that we did. Integrity has gone down a bit, which is quite interesting, but kind of seeing a fairly similar pattern to the year before. But it's safe to say that despite the focus on line managers, managers still remain a barrier to improving engagement. So what we found is that companies are saying that they believe only 28% of managers have got a good understanding of what engagement is, and only 13% said their managers were good at engaging their teams. So I do feel a little bit, I think we're a bit harsh sometimes on line managers. They get a quite hard time. It's all their fault. You know, engagement happens in the line. They're not very good at it. But what we've seen at People Lab is that companies are not great at really investing in the development of their line managers to make sure they understand what engagement is and, most importantly, how to improve it. So I think there's a massive opportunity there to either integrate engagement, upskilling and training into kind of sort of well-established leadership development programs, or to do something separately as an add-on. And the stat at the bottom there, managers being rated as good or excellent declined by 25%. So it's a real issue here around setting managers up for success. They are absolutely critical to engagement and improving engagement, but very few companies are really good at saying, well, how can we support our managers to be able to do this? Okay, so yeah, just following on from what I've said previously, there's a real lack of investment to upskill managers or engagement professionals. So you can see some stats there that, you know, just over half allocate budget to develop and train managers in employee engagement, but you know, only 20% invest in coaching, and only 29% of the professionals, practitioners we spoke to had received any formal kind of engagement training. So, you know, a lot of people out there who are working in this area who've never actually had any formal training development when it comes to engagement. They're just kind of expected to know what to do, how to do it, how to kind of improve in organisation. So I think there's a big gap. What we're seeing from the research is a really big gap around that investment in upskill and training development. Okay, we also asked about budgets, and no surprise here, budgets are shrinking everywhere in every sector we work with. But we see from last year, you know, it's definitely less money kicking around than there was the year before even. So, you know, those lucky people in 2016 that had more than 250k to do something in engagement went from 17% to 6%. So the general kind of shift is there's definitely less money for people to help improve engagement. What are the budgets being spent on? So no surprises, the sort of main spend is still on the survey, and I could do a whole other webinar on surveys and is it really a good use of money. I've worked with so many organisations where they've got, you know, money or budgets for researching how people are feeling, but no money to do anything with that insight. And it's almost like, well, why bother? You know, do you need to spend that the big money on surveys? I think we're starting finally to see a change. I'll come to that shortly, but definitely the survey landscape is changing. But still, the main area budgets go on. It's the survey. Again, you know, see this other amounts there: training development, 57%, internal comms, big decrease in internal comms to help engagement, down from 81% in 2016 to 51% last year. So yeah, it gives you a picture of kind of where the money's being spent. So what we're seeing finally, I kind of predicted this about sort of 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, when we first started People Lab, which was about 9 years ago this week. We talked about kind of the staff survey having had its day, and like 9 years later, we're finally seeing the tide turn. So we're seeing more and more companies realise they don't need to do an annual survey. Maybe it's not giving them the value that they want. And we're seeing, I think, with the rise of technology, people moving to much more kind of always on measurement, pulse checks, those sorts of apps that can help them to really keep the finger on their pulse of how their people are feeling. But definitely the kind of the day of the annual survey, I think finally is over, which is good news, because I not convinced it adds value that needs to add. I think it's fine if you do it with other activities as part of an overall strategy, but so many companies just do a survey. I think that's kind of all they need to do. Okay, the rise of tech. So we asked respondents about technology. We've actually got a whole other report, which could be something we could talk about in future, where we looked at the opportunities for enterprise social networks to impact positively on engagement and well-being within organisations. And we had some really, really interesting results come from that. So we didn't kind of go into tech in too much detail in this report, but we did ask about tech. And it's interesting that only 9% of those we spoke to are currently using an app. So there's still a huge potential for organisations to adopt these new technologies. But 18% said, yeah, would really want one or love the one we have. Other people a little bit more kind of, I suppose, you know, waiting to see how things will pan out. So they've got potential, they're not okay, but I'm not quite sure yet, or I don't know a great deal about them yet. So kind of a lot of people sat in that kind of middle ground waiting to be convinced, I think. So I think it's a huge opportunity with those people sat in there to show them how these apps can absolutely help to impact and improve engagement. Okay, so we asked also about the barriers. So what gets in the way of you improving and developing engagement? So the key barriers that came out were getting buy-in. So there is still this issue of lip service being paid to engagement. Yeah, we know we need to do something, but you know, we're not actually all that committed to do it. So we're going to kind of, you know, put it in your job title, but don't expect any kind of budget or investment in actually improving things, which links to lack of resource. So I think those two are very much linked. Lack of understanding generally across the organisation about what it is, how to improve it, and poor old line managers are also seen as a barrier. And I think it's, you know, it's not their fault. We're not really doing a great job of making sure that they are set up for success. So those are kind of the key barriers that were shared with us. So in a nutshell then, what we found is that you know, organisations are recognising more and more that engaged employees are critical for business success. And you know, I'm kind of trying not to get involved in the sort of the people that are desperately trying to get me to sort of talk about this online by saying it's completely, you know, emperor's new clothes. You know, the evidence is there. I mean, I'm a nerdy psychologist at heart. I know I'm an academic originally. You know, I am absolutely evidence-based practice, and you know, I've read report after report, study after study that says if you get it right with your people, whatever you want to call that, call it different things, but if you get it right with your people, then absolutely that impacts a whole range of business outcomes. And you know, we use a lot of positive psychology at People Lab, as our approach is based on positive psychology, and there are loads of studies that show that this stuff matters. So organisations are recognising this, which is great, but here's the but. They still don't really know what they mean by engagement, and they don't really have a strategy and a plan. Not all of them, of course, I'm generalising here, but I think this is a big part of the problem of why we're not seeing engagement levels around the world improve, because people kind of know that it makes sense intuitively, but not really quite sure what we mean by it, how we define it, and we don't really have a strategy and a plan. And resourcing engagement is still an issue for many. Budgets are shrinking. Time to focus on engagement is also shrinking. A lot of people do this as part of a wider role. Very few people just have engagement as their kind of 100% of their role. So time to focus on this is also on the decrease. And there's little investment in developing the skills and expertise that we need for either those people with formal responsibility for engagement, or indeed line managers who have a significant impact on engagement. And if we're not setting these people up for success, then you know, is it any wonder that we're not seeing the kind of improvements that we want to see? So I think, you know, really interesting findings. You know, so there are some differences from last year, but I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think about it. Some of our recommendations have a definition, you know, whatever that definition is. Just know in your organisation, when you talk about engagement, if you even talk about engagement, some people talk about creating a great place to work, becoming an employer of choice, know what you mean by it and have a shared understanding. Obviously have a strategy and a plan. You know, what is the outcome you're looking to achieve? How will focusing on engagement help your business achieve its overall goals and vision? You know, how does it align to your overall business strategy, and therefore what's the plan? Obviously engage stakeholders, speaking to them in their language, what keeps them awake at night and how can engagement help them. Develop experts, goes without saying, people that are working in this field, either formally or informally, need to have some expertise in terms of how to develop and improve engagement. Invest for success. So, it's not hard to make a business case when it comes to engagement. You've only got to look at, for example, things like absenteeism and attrition, and look at how much it costs you every time someone walks out of your organisation to make a very compelling case for investing in engagement in terms of reducing attrition and reducing absenteeism. Focus on leaders and managers, they're absolutely critical, goes without saying, and unleash the potential of tech. So we think that tech's got a huge role to play, especially for those hard to reach employees. And it's going to be an interesting few years seeing how this kind of pans out and where we can really use tech in a positive way to make a positive impact on engagement. So those are our recommendations. Love to hear what you have to say. So hopefully there will be some questions, and I hope I'll be able to provide some answers.
Great. While we just let any of our attendees, I guess, write their questions. If you do want to ask Emma a question, there should be a question section in the control panel where you'll be able to type them. Firstly, thank you so much, Emma, for going through the report. Like, this report by PeopleLab it's such a detailed and thorough report. It's probably one of the best I've read around employee engagement. So really appreciate you taking time to kind of go through it with us. One question that we do have is, I guess, so we're just kind of wondering, have you seen the, I guess, an impact of Glassdoor and other social media platforms on essentially on how seriously companies are taking the issue of employee engagement now that these platforms are, giving greater transparency on workplace cultures?
Yeah, definitely. So 9 years ago, when we first started PeopleLab, I don't know how I'd come across Glassdoor, but I had heard of Glassdoor, probably because I'm a real nerd and love this area and always like looking at what's happening. And it was my little secret weapon, Glassdoor. So did a lot of training and obviously going to speak to possible clients. And I always found that you make the business case. The business case now is really, really, really well documented. It wasn't so well documented back then, but you make the business case, they kind of nod a little bit and say, yeah, but our organization's different. And then I kind of bring out my secret weapon, which would be Glassdoor, and I'd say, have you heard of Glassdoor? And they'd always go, no, and I'd explain what it was. And you could see the horror on people's faces, and immediately grabbing their phones to have a look at what their rating on Glassdoor was. And then it would be kind of, the next response would be sort of defensiveness. Well, that's not fair. How can this happen? I'd be like, it's the way the world's going. It's about transparency. Look at TripAdvisor. And of course now, everyone's heard of Glassdoor, and there's, I do still do training sessions where occasionally a couple of people might not have heard of it. But I think what Glassdoor did for engagement was really, it was really helpful to get key stakeholders to take it seriously. It's actually far better we kind of, look at culture and engagement now rather than, 5 years down the line where people are not coming to work for you because you've got a really poor rating. So there's a really practical example of how something like Glassdoor's really impacted engagement. And we know anecdotally, and also research has shown us that people are absolutely using apps such as Glassdoor to think about where they want to go work. So it's absolutely had an impact, no doubt about it.
Not sure if you can see this question here, Emma, but it's, what would engagement training for managers involve?
That's a great question. So when we do engagement training for managers, we do the kind of basic 101 on engagement, which is what is it, first of all, why does it matter, so why bother, and then how do you do it? And we share some really, really, really simple practical tools and techniques to help managers understand what it is they need to do to engage their teams. And over the years, what we've found is keeping it dead simple is absolutely critical, because line managers, especially like frontline managers, I was with a bunch of supervisors yesterday with working with them with the charity we're working with at the moment. They've got so much to do. Engagement's just thinking about engagement as well as everything else. It's like, well, just make it dead easy for me. Just make it part and parcel of what I've already need to do. So we kind of share with them a whole range of tools and techniques, and we actually get them to experience these tools and techniques first as an employee. So I think lots of companies forget that managers are also employees, and they have to kind of figure out how they feel about working for a company and figure out their own engagement before they have hope in hell of engaging their teams. So we kind of work through these tools with line managers, get them to think about their own engagement first, and then we say, right, now I want you to go away and do something similar with your team. So it kind of, they get to experience it first. But you know, main thing is keeping it really, really simple. So it's like, what is it? Why does it matter? And then the most important bit, the majority of the time we spend with managers is on how you do it. And we've got a line managers toolkit we share with them that gives them the blueprint essentially for improving engagement.
And what would be your, I guess, your top 3 tools and techniques for managers to use in their teams?
So I think one of the, I won't go for a top 3. I might share one, which is my app. So I've got some things I call my golden nuggets. My kind of, these are things I found that make the biggest difference. And we use what underpins all of our work really is a strength-based approach and positive psychology, and kind of take that approach because I did 10 years in house, we said at the beginning, and I kind of, you know, been there, got the t-shirt, made loads of mistakes, got it wrong, but also came across some stuff that worked amazingly well for me. And the stuff that worked amazingly well was actually what kind of enabled me to start the business, because I started talking about what had worked amazingly well for me, and I had people approaching me saying, hey, can you come and do that with our company, which is why I started People Lab. So what worked amazingly well was using tools like appreciative inquiry from positive psychology. Don't be put off by the name, it's a horrible name, but going back to keeping it really, really simple, something as simple as asking managers to get their teams to, in pairs, share a story each about their best ever time at work. So thinking from any point in their career, you know, what's been their best, their high point at work, their peak experience, their best experience. And we get managers to run this activity and just to get people in pairs, 5 minutes each, share their story. And then very simply, they go around the room and they share their partner's story. And the manager will maybe scribble on a flip chart, or if they're out on the side of a motorway or a canal or whatever it might be, and they haven't got a flip chart, they'll just make some notes on a pad. And what tends to come out, what happens very, very quickly, is that there's a lot of similarities within the stories, but also some differences. And you know, inevitably, the light bulb goes on pretty quickly. People sort of think, oh, it's really interesting, because it's all, as you'd expect from the theory, if into the theory, it's all the stuff that is about intrinsic motivation. So it's stuff like, I felt valued, I had autonomy, I made a positive difference, you know, I had a great manager, I worked with great people. Nobody in my sort of 10 plus years of doing this with thousands of people all over the world, nobody ever says because I got paid lots of money, or because I had my own parking space, or because the coffee was great. So very quickly, running that activity, the manager and their team can really hone in within sort of half an hour on what's important to that team and what is within their gift to control to change. So, you know, the sorts of stuff that comes out inevitably is the sort of stuff that can be tackled at that kind of team level. So that's probably my ultimate sort of top tip for helping a manager to start to talk about what's important to me at work with their teams. And we have got, I can share with you, Liam, a kind of a practical guide for how to run that. So I can share that with you, and you can share it with people on the webinar afterwards if it's of interest.
Sounds good. And of course, I guess kind of alluding, going on from what you were saying, is it's so key really to kind of give your employees that voice. It kind of starts with that employee voice and making sure they're listened to in the organization. Yeah. You mentioned it in the in your presentation itself, but I guess how effective is technology at being able to address these kind of issues with, I guess, low employee engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just hit the nail on the head there with voice. I mean, for me, tech is just it's a channel for me. It's the way I see it, you know. And there's nothing worse for people. Well, there's a lot worse, but I'm being dramatic here. But one of the worst things you can do when it comes to engagement is make assumptions about what engages people. It's really patronising, you know, and it's very off-putting. It's very disengaging. If a company decides, I know how you want to be engaged, well, actually you don't. Just talk to me like I'm a human being and ask me, just have a conversation with me. We know employee voice is critical for engagement, and I think what tech's enabled us to do is to widen that participation, widen that collaboration, and widen the opportunity for people to genuinely make their voice heard. So people who are, based in weird and wonderful locations, and goodness knows when I was in house, I was probably one of them. I've done, I've worked out of weird and wonderful sort of port cabins, and out of my car, and all sorts of places where you can feel a little bit isolated. So having tech that enables you to have a genuine conversation, or someone to say, what do you think about this, or tell me how you feel, or make your voice heard, it is, really, really empowering for people who are kind of, not desk based, or perhaps not in the HQ. So I think that's an obvious application of tech to really impact engagement.
Definitely. We're running slightly over, so I'll ask one more question that hopefully you'll be able to give your insights on. So I guess, what advice can you give HR and communications leaders when it comes to, I guess, getting the importance of engagement understood and adequate budgets, I guess, assigned to address it? How should they go about it?
Yeah, so I think for me, it comes back to strategy, and it comes back to talking the language of the business. So when we go in to speak to clients, or our current clients or possible new clients, it always comes back to understanding their business, what's keeping them awake at night, talking their language. So setting the goals and outcomes of an engagement strategy, whilst you might want to speak to a lot of people who say, well, we want to get on the Times top 100, or we want to make, we want to get investors in People Gold, or we want to increase our survey results. That's fine, but so what? What's that going to give you? Is it going to give you a reputational advantage? Great, then it's worth going for. Is it going to reduce your attrition, reduce your absenteeism? Is it going to help you sell more? What's the kind of the business outcome you're looking to impact? So I think once you start talking in that language, that's when you get taken notice of. And just a very quick story before we finish. I got the train back recently from Manchester, and I sat opposite this guy and his obviously PA, and they were chatting, and I could sort of tell that he was sort of chief exec material just by the way he was chatting, and I was surprised they were in economy because I thought they should have been in first class. But anyway, as we got into London, we got chatting, and he asked me what I did, and I told him. He looked at me, a little bit blankly, and I talked to him about, the business case. The stuff that I do helps companies, reduce attrition and save over £500,000 per annum on that. Reduce absenteeism and save, £360,000. Increase cross sales, which we did for one client, and increase cross sales of over 1.5 million. So I quoted some stuff at him, and his eyes lit up. He gave me his business card, said, "Oh, let's have a conversation." And he was actually, I won't tell you which company it was, but it was a very big sports retailer, I shall say. That's all I shall say. Not the one that was dodgy recently, another one, a nice one. But the minute I spoke in his language, he was interested. So for me, it's using that psychology, using that stakeholder piece around saying, well, what's keeping this person awake at night, and how can I speak in their language? Because if I speak in the language of engagement or HR, they're probably not going to be interested. So that's my top tip, really.
No, it's probably a very sensible one, actually, speaking their language. Thank you so much. I think we'll probably have to end it there because we are running slightly over. Thank you very much for all your questions as well. Emma, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been so helpful, really, going through the report. As I said, the report, it's so detailed and thorough. It really gives you a very wide opening to the world of employee engagement. So thank you so much for taking us through it today and answering all the questions. And to everyone else, thank you so much for joining, and hope you all have a very good weekend. All right, thanks very much, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Liam. Bye. Bye, everyone.